Welcome back to Bring Your A Game with A-Patt. Of course, it's yours truly, Anfernee Patterson. A lot to speak on in sports today, per usual. It has been a wonderful weekend for college football, but a lot of animosity and madness going on that we're going to get into. First things first, we appreciate you supporting the podcast. If you're new, please go like and subscribe on our YouTube channel at bring the A game with A-Patt. Bring your A game with A-Patt, that is. Also, we are on Spotify, Apple Music, and iHeart Radio. So go ahead, make sure you go like and subscribe and respond to the polls as well that we have for you. But the things we're going to get into today involve, of course, college sports. First thing is first on the list, after coming into the weekend ranked number 4 in the college football playoff rankings, the Florida State Seminoles, undefeated 13-0 ACC champions, are left out of the college playoff. Alabama, who won over the Georgia Bulldogs, come in at the number 4 spot at 12-1 on the season. And we get into whether Florida State deserves to be in or not. We also talk about the SEC championship game between Georgia and Alabama. What went wrong for the Dogs? What went right for the Tide? And with that being said, the Dogs and the Seminoles are in the Orange Bowl. What does that look like moving forward since it is coming close? I believe the game is on December 30th. And who takes home all the marbles this year in the college football playoff? But first things first, did the committee get it right with Florida State? Absolutely not. Let's break this down here for everybody that's been wondering, that's been waiting. So Florida State is number 4 in ranking coming into the week, wins the ACC championship game, yet they don't make the college football playoff because their quarterback, who was injured against a game in against North Alabama at home, they have been able to win games with their second and third string quarterback, mainly their third string quarterback, because their second string got knocked out against Florida. They are not considered one of the 4 best teams, and I believe that has to be a travesty. Mainly because Florida State, while the ACC had a rough year with Clemson usually being the top dog, Florida State went out and scheduled non-conference opponent games. One of them being against the LSU Tigers, which they played in Orlando on a neutral site and scored, I believe it was 31 straight points, something of that nature. It was a really dominating win against the SEC team. Also went to the swamp, played a Florida team that also made a little bit of noise in the SEC. Went 2-0. Also, quality wins against Duke before their quarterback went down. You beat Louisville, who's again coming in averaging, I believe, 30 something points a game, and that win against them, a great defensive performance at that, guys. To hold that team to 6 points. I mean, if you could go back and look at that game. Um, they're not in the college football playoff, and the reasoning I believe the committee gave was because they're not the same team without their quarterback. My thing with that is I'm not sure how many teams are the same without their star or starting quarterback. I mean, prime example, um, the team that got, and what kills me is the team that got over them in Alabama. We saw what they looked like with their backups and their third string quarterbacks and struggled at USF, a team that did not finish particularly well to end the season. And that is when they went back to Milrow and they started winning games. I'm not sure how many teams can do what Florida State just did and win those games and find them in the position. Also, this is a team sport. Whether we like to hear it or not, yes, individuals on the football field make a difference. However, this is a team sport. It's 11 players on the field. Other players have to make plays in unison for players to be successful. You have an offensive line, you have receivers, you have running backs, sometimes fullbacks, depending on the system that you're running. Like, many different factors go into that. And for Florida State to go through that in the last three games and win like they did is far more impressive than however you want to look at the score and say, oh, they should have won by 40 and whatnot. The other issue I have with Florida State not getting in is a one-loss Alabama team that scheduled a non-conference game against Texas that was at their crib, lost by 10 plus points at their crib, dominated. That seems to not matter to this committee for whatever reason. A team, like, at some point, wins and losses have to matter. I get that Alabama ran the table after that win. I get that they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game by 3 points, which we're going to get into. However, I'm not understanding the logic of how is Florida State not considered one of the four best teams when they ran the table with their backups and were still able to be productive on offense, to get the points that they needed to win games. If I'm not mistaken, they won those games by 2 possessions. And being on your third string quarterback, I cannot reiterate that enough. This is just one of those seasons where you're literally, I just did it just now, you're scratching your head because how does a team that has been ranked 8th all season and a team that has been in the top 4 for the most part of this season is not, they jump a top 4 team and then that top 4 team moves to 5, even though both won a conference championship, yet one literally won their out of conference game against an SEC team, a league that for the most part this year has not looked up to par when playing non-conference opponents. I believe the best win for the SEC this season was Ole Miss at Tulane, and we can see how that played out. And that is just, I'm sorry, because I do believe at the end of the day, Florida State is one of the 4 best teams, and Georgia is one of the 4 best teams. But I don't see how you get that wrong and decide to leave or punish a team because one player went down. That makes entirely no sense to me when it's a team sport that has happened and you have one team in there that did not look that looked worse when their quarterback went down. That goes to my next point. Also, how is Georgia not one of the 4 best teams? If you want the 4 best teams in the playoff, here's my thing. Let's look at Georgia's resume before the 3-point loss to Alabama in the SEC championship game. They had wins against number 12 Missouri, which I believe was a 9-point win at home. Number 9 Ole Miss in dominant fashion. That was a 50 burger as well. On the road at Rocky Top in Tennessee, that was a dominant win. I believe they dropped 38. And a 50 burger against number 20 Kentucky at home as well. At some point, winning games has to matter. As I stated before, Florida State played their games, they won, and they dominated the SEC teams they played. And this was not particularly a great year for the SEC as a whole. That is why coming into the week, I felt if Georgia was the number 1 team, Georgia's the best team, they are a lock for the playoff, win or loss going into it. Which leads to my next subject. Georgia fell to the Tide 27-24 in the SEC championship game. That makes Nick Saban 4-0 against Georgia in the SEC championship game. You know, Tipper cap off Nick Saban's. He's arguably the GOAT, one of the best coaches, if not the best, to play this game. But what went wrong for the Bulldogs in this game? I think I go back to 2 points in this where I felt that it changed the game or had a huge impact on how the game played out. Um, I believe this was in the first or second quarter. I can't remember to be exact, and I like to be perfect. But Georgia is attempting a field goal, and a penalty moved it back to, I believe, 50 yards. That field goal ended up going off the right part of the Lord, I'm getting a brain fart here, but that field goal ended up missing, hitting the right part and going off. So that was 3 points that was left on the board as well. One was also a catch, which was a fourth down and four conversion that was actually not a catch and was not reviewed. And watching that in live time, it was from Isaiah Miro to Isaiah Bond. I believe it was a 22-yard catch at that. As the second quarter is winding down, if Georgia gets that stop, that changes the momentum of the game. Alabama gets that conversion. They continue to drive. They get a chance to put up points. And they talked about it on the game of the chess between Nick Saban and Kirby Smart in that series. One calling the timeout, making them make the decision to either take the field goal or not. Nick Saban calling another timeout to really just think it over. Ends up deciding to go for it. It was ruled a catch, but not reviewed. So bad of a missed call that Gene Steratore, who is one of the replay officials for the game, came on to start the second half, third quarter in the CBS booth to explain how that was a missed call, how protocol was not followed, how a replay should have been instigated if there's any doubt, and the rest is history. Alabama goes on to score a touchdown on that drive. I believe it was Milroe to Burton. That is a 17-7 game. Georgia's down 10 instead of possibly being down 6 or 3, depending on the field goal, to go into the half. Mainly, that's a 10-point swing for the Bulldogs. But that's not to say the officiating was terrible. That is just a huge missed call or a huge lack of protocol per se in a game like that where that is huge. Another thing that was interesting for me and I thought was a big key factor in the game was tight end Brock Bowers and receiver Ladd McConkey for the Dogs coming into the game. I believe that with them playing, the offense will be a lot better. I also believe they will be more healthy. They were ready to go, especially with McConkey being out for a few games this season, dealing with back issues and ankle issues. Brock Bowers also, he had surgery on his ankle as well, mainly getting back into the flow of things. We saw that even as we watched the game, Bowers was not 100%. McConkey was 100%. That's not an excuse, but Bowers didn't have that quickness that he's used to having, which obviously affected the game, being able to get separations and those sorts. However, Bowers finished for 5 catches for 53 yards, and McConkey finished with 3 catches for 38 yards. Another thing that was pivotal in the game was the trenches. Georgia lost in the trenches because they allowed 114 yards rushing in the game for Alabama. Not particularly bad, but you lost at the end of the day. You lost in the trenches, which goes into the game plan for Jalen Milroe. I thought the game plan for Milroe worked. You start off the game rushing 3 to the spy, making him beat you, throwing the football. He made a few plays, but he also made plays that could have been interceptions. The same could have been said for Alabama's game plan against Beck. However, coming into this game, I think Kirby Smart wanted Jalen Milroe to be him throwing the football. And for the most part, it worked. It just was not good enough. Sometimes the three-man pressure did not get home quick enough, and Milroe had more time to throw, which means receivers and defensive backs are battling for 5+ seconds. Receivers are likely to get open. But Georgia did make plays. They finished the game with 4 sacks to Bama's 2. And you have to just get turnovers. I think the other thing that happened in this game, Georgia turned the ball over deep in their own territory, um, with the bad exchange on the handoff by Carson Beck proved to be pivotal. That led to 3 points for Alabama. 3 points is the difference in the game. You could do the math. However, some would say the defensive game plan for Kirby Smart got a little bit conservative as the game went on. Um, However, end of the day, Miro finished 13 for 23, 192 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not particularly impressive. Not particularly too bad, but I think it was some of those things you can live with. Which brings us to my next point. Georgia, going back to the first point, Georgia, number one team coming in, lost by 3 points on a neutral site to the number 8 team in the country. I don't understand how, if a team is number one, loses by 3 points in the conference championship game, is dropped 5 spots in the final college football playoff rankings below Florida State. And so that makes me question was that if you want the 4 best teams, you believe Florida State is a better team than UGA. And I'm not here to argue that, because I'm of the belief that games matter. You play games, you win games, that matters. Florida State did that. I'm not sure how you drop down after winning those games. Injuries are part of the sport. You have to play the game. You have to make it happen. If it's the 4 best teams, which is very subjective, because it seems that every time it's the 4 best teams, it is very subjective. It's always questionable. It's always nitpicking things. It's never, I think in the year for the college football playoffs, I never seen the committee justify a player being injured as to a team being left out of the playoff and they went undefeated. Matter of fact, Ohio State had the same issue happen. Sure, they dominated in their conference championship game, but they didn't get that same they didn't get that knock against them, because at the same time, again, injuries are a part of the game. It's a next man up mentality. You have to be ready in that situation. Which, going into the last two things, both teams are in Orange Bowl. I'm gonna be quite frank with you. I'm not sure both teams are motivated to play this game, because if you're Georgia, number one team, you lost for the first time 29 games on a neutral field in the SEC championship game by 3 points, and the committee thought you just wasn't as good enough, so you dropped 5 spots. I'm not sure the Bulldogs are motivated to play this game as much. And of course, with NILs, with opt-outs coming up, transfer portal, be ready for that as well. Just with any team, that's just the new age of college football. Florida State, I'm not sure they're motivated to really play this game as well, because at the end of the day, this game does not solve anything. I know we live. I know the first thing you want to say is, well, Florida State could go out and prove that they deserve to be in the playoff if they go out there and beat Georgia, and Georgia can prove they deserve to be in the playoff if they go out there and beat Florida State. That's just, let's be honest with you, that's not going to change anything. Um, it's not, because that is what we say every time a team goes into a bowl game after being left out. I remember a few years ago with the Big 12, I believe it was TCU and Baylor. They got left out because they did not have a conference championship game. And both respectively went out and dominated in their games. Yet people still didn't think, oh, they deserved to be in. Some people did, don't get me wrong, but I would say a consensus did not say, oh, TCU and Baylor deserved to be in the playoff. Like, it's a travesty that Florida State really got burned by the committee for this, because it doesn't change anything. You know, you play to win, you play for championships, you play for opportunity to compete for a national championship. Florida State did that, and the committee took that away from the players, from the coaches for winning, and basically rewarded an Alabama team again that was rewarded for losing by 2 scores at home. So it goes to the question of why play the games, why schedule these tough non-conference opponents if they're just not gonna matter at the end of the day. 3 weeks do not tell what a team is. It doesn't that we evaluate the whole body of work. 3 games in a week span does not tell that. Also, I know people were making the argument that Alabama deserved to be in because of their resume, because of their wins. And I'm looking at it as, if you're saying Florida State wins were, I guess, pedestrian or not as impressive against Louisville, against Florida, are we just going to forget the Iron Bowl where the Tigers were dominating Alabama in the trenches, 4th and goal from the 31-yard line, and needed a miracle to win? And the Tide literally needed a miracle to win that game. Are we just going to forget about USF on the road where Alabama couldn't score a touchdown until the fourth quarter, and that was just because USF was not a good team and Alabama did not have a decent quarterback at the time? Are we not just going to forget the same opponents that Alabama and Georgia played? Georgia dominated those opponents. Alabama barely squeaked by to win, yet because Georgia lost by 3 points to Alabama, they're not one of the 4 best teams. All of this is subjective at the end of the day, but if you start looking at wins and losses, you have to say to yourself, how in the world does a one-loss Alabama team who lost to a top 4 team now because Texas is in is one of the 4 best teams? When the wins aren't impressive, when they were called on to do so, they weren't in dominating fashion. That is you have to feel for Florida State. Um you have to feel for Georgia too, because you can't sit here and say 4 best teams and not have a team that's won 29 straight games, a team that dominated against their quality opponents as well, same opponents that the number 4 team played, and say they're not one of the 4 best teams. You definitely cannot say a team that dominated those same opponents that Alabama struggled with and needed. Prime example, LSU, a team Florida State routed, and a team that Alabama struggled with until Jaden Daniels was knocked out of the game. I don't see how that rationale works. It doesn't make sense. A 3-point loss again on a neutral field to a number 8 team, they get to jump 4 spots. That number 1 team drops 5 spots. That is very questionable. Now with the top 4 out, top 4 goes Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama, Michigan, Alabama Rose Bowl, Texas, and Washington in the Sugar Bowl. If we're going early predictions right now, I'm going to say that Alabama should be favored in this game. However, I think Michigan has to get that first playoff win, and they have struggled, particularly against SEC, particularly The last time I believe they played the SEC was Georgia in the Orange Bowl. Um, right now, I'm kind of leaning advantage Michigan, even with Alabama being in because of what Michigan could do. In the Sugar Bowl, it's not really an easy pick for me, honestly. I know it'll be more Texas fans there because of proximity, but I I don't know. I feel like maybe Washington has something for the Longhorns. We'll have to see. But I think Texas will be favored. Right now, I'm gonna say Texas will win. Thanks for tuning into the and national champion. We're gonna go Michigan Wolverines for now. Thank you for taking a listen to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe, like our podcast on YouTube, go on Spotify, Apple Music, and iHeart to listen to the podcast. Just search "Bring Your A Game with A-Patt." Thank you all for tuning in today. Have a wonderful week and prepare for the holidays. I'll see you guys later.